Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the wider issue of anchor babies, not only in the United States, but in the West generally. Now, this is sort of pertinent and topical because the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the Trump administration's case to deny US citizenship to babies that are born in the United States from either illegals or people on a temporary visa. Now, to any sensible person, this seems quite reasonable. The illegals are gaming the system, and they come into the US illegally. They pump out 2 or 3 babies in quick succession and go, oh, well, US citizens, you can't get rid of us because our children are US citizens. And the same goes for people on temporary work visas. They may only have or a student visa, they may only have a short-term study or work visa that may go for, 1 or a couple of years or whatever, but they aggressively seek out opportunities to procreate. And then they claim, well, that the child is an American citizen, therefore we get to stay as well, and by default become American citizens, or at least long-term residents. Now, this, of course, is utter nonsense, and is, again, blatant gaming of the system. And every migration agent and people trafficker and people smuggler the world over knows this and uses this in order to act as an inducement. Now, we had the same thing in Australia, and before the offshore island processing of illegals occurred, what would happen there were refugee camps in, for example, Indonesia, which is, depending on how fast your boat goes, is about a 24-hour boat ride from Indonesia to, say, the northern coast of Australia. And the boat would be full of heavily pregnant women who are going to give birth sort of within the next week or two. And the idea was that they would come to Australia, and even if Australia wouldn't accept them, by the time they were processed and arranged for deportation was arranged, that the baby would be born, and then they would get free medical care, and they'd get all that. Again, the people smugglers acutely aware of all this. And this was added as an inducement to pick heavily pregnant women only to make these journeys. And but when and so they used to try it all the time, tens of thousands a year. But once the offshore processing came, so you're not going to get residency in Australia, no matter what, then the illegal entry stopped. Pretty much dried up. It still goes on in the remote coastal areas of Australia. Australia's a lot of coastline, so smaller boats can still make it to the coast, and then people using their illegal alien network can then sort of disappear into the continent. But coming back to the US, which is the issue here, pregnant women from South America and other places around the world would come through the southern border in Mexico, go to Canada and come in through that border, whatever. But the idea being that if they could just get into the US, stay long enough to have a baby, then that would give them indirect citizenship. And this is what President Trump is trying to put an end to. If someone arrives legally, of course, through the proper migration routes, or they're an American citizen, this sort of thing, then of course the children born are Americans. But the gaming of the system by illegals, and again, people on short-term work or study visas, I don't think that I'm in full agreement with President Trump on this one, that should be. Now, you can imagine the screams and the cries from the globalists, because this is a great way, the anchor baby, as it's called, the anchor baby is a great way to gin up and ramp up and turbocharge mass migration. Then it makes it much harder to evict people or deport them if they then have had children in the United States or in the Western countries. So this is very much part of the globalist playbook and the mass migration playbook. So they're doing anything and everything they can to stop the president's policy here. So it's gone, depending on, it's gone through the lower courts. And of course, the activist crowd go and find an activist. They go judge shopping for an activist judge where the outcome's prearranged. The verdict's made or a stay or whatever is done by and I don't know why district court judges have so much power, but anyway, they can put these national injunctions on. So then it has to go to a higher court and then, appeals courts and so on. Now it's going to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, the Trump administration has done rather well in the Supreme Court. I mean, depending on whose numbers you look at and whether you're looking at a partial victory or a total success or a limited success, however you look at it, it's really 9 out of 10 Supreme Court decisions since the Trump administration's been in office have either overturned an injunction against the administration or overturned part of it or any material part of the injunction. So you could say the Trump administration has come away with sort of 90% plus wins. There's some of those wins have really have still had restrictions upon them from what the original policy position of the administration was, but nonetheless they've pushed back on the activist judges. Now, if you look at the other side of it, the activist, depending again on how you view the injunctions and the stays and so on, the lower courts, again where they've cherry-picked activist judges, the lower courts have almost completely disfavored the Trump administration in 75% of cases. Again, some are saying 65. I'd actually say it's 75, because if you look at some of the ones where they're saying, well, the Trump team sort of got away with something. They've got 5 points on their policy. 4 of them were overruled, but 1 got. That's not a win. So they're only claiming total and absolute victories, and that's 65%. If you look at total victories and partial victories, it's 75 to 80% in the lower courts against the Trump administration. Trump administration does better in the appeals courts as it moves up the further you move up the chain, the more the rules of evidence apply. Now, it's easy to stick a sole activist as a district court judge, and the Biden administration, the autopen administration, definitely did that. I mean, some of these judges you wouldn't employ them to sweep the fucking floor, and yet they're federal judges. It's insane, rabid activists. And anyway, it's not hard to get decisions that the activists want at that level, but it's much harder as it moves up the value chain. If you look at it, most of the verdicts that the judges have come out with in the lower courts, it's been very, very ideological. It could be seen as racist. It could be seen as homophobic and this sort of thing. And it just completely, and the judges are doing it are either Jewish activists or feminist activists. There doesn't seem to be much in between, or race hustler activists at least. And they're making again decisions against the Trump administration. So, but as it moves up the court, moves up into the appeals courts and the higher courts generally, then the rules of evidence have greater impact, whereas ideology has a much greater impact in the lower courts. And nearly certainly that I've seen against the Trump administration, every judicial stay and injunction against the Trump administration from the lower courts has been ideological and not legal. But again, it moves up it moves further up the chain there, and then the verdicts and the examinations tend to be much more legal, and that's Trump is winning more often in those courts. But it's still sort of almost 50-50 at the appeals court level, at the state level, just showing how many activists are stacked even in the appeals courts now. The only court that the activists haven't completely hijacked are some of the Supreme Courts in some of the states, or the Supreme Court of the United States. That's only because of the first Trump administration. The leftists and the globalists and the race hustlers and grifters, they're outraged by this. And you can see the drama that went on in Trump's first term over the appointment of judges, how the effort that the globalists and the Democrats put into subverting the Trump administration's judicial picks for that court. the Supreme Court of the United States, because they planned that Hillary would win that election that Trump won, and that the court will be packed with Democrat nominee flunkies, as they've done with the district courts. So this is the thing. Now, the issues here are huge. Let's suppose that the Trump administration is unsuccessful in getting this overturned. Maybe they'll win a partial thing or so, but so they get it. They don't succeed in getting it overturned, but they still can evict and deport those people who have anchor babies. So as soon as a Democrat comes back into the office, or the Democrats control the Senate and the House of Representatives, then all these people can be that have been deported. So, well, you can come again because we're going to say your children are American citizens, so come back at any time. So this means there's going to be a pool of, assuming that deportations are completed in Trump's term, that means that there's going to be somewhere between 10 to 14 million children. They may be adults by then. 10 to 14 million people in South America and elsewhere around the world that can suddenly say, yep, okay, I'm an American citizen, and now the Democrat Party has recognized it, so I'm going to head back to the United States. So suddenly there's a mass wave of people coming in, 10 to 14, 15 million, whatever it is. No one knows how many, because no one knows how many illegals are in the United States. No one can quantify exactly how many illegals are having children. But even here in Australia, as soon as someone arrives from a third world country, the first thing they do is pump out 2 to 3 children, with rapid succession, and they think this then gives them effect, you can't deport us now, you can't kick us out. Look, our children are all born here, and it's something that every third world peasant does. It's just a matter of that's how you do business, and so it's very much ingrained in their mentality. But it needs to be overturned, because the inducement, or the lure that this has to any third world peasant. So all I got to do is cross that line, the US border, and I can be within a couple of days of have a baby on that other side. That's it. So they can't get. So I now have citizenship by indirect or default, because I had a baby there, and that's very much their play, and they're all doing it. They all think that, no matter where they come from, in any part of the world, this is seen. The anchor baby system is seen as a way to ensure they can stay in the rich first world Western country, and then loot it and steal from it, and so on. So I hope it is overturned, because that lure, that motivation to get to a first world country and drop a baby, and then again have that citizenship, that is such a huge inducement. If you take that away, then you take away a lot of the incentive for these people to attempt to come to a first world country, or in this case the United States. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.